The foxwoman who took shelter in my garage after a storm. The crash from the garage wasn't the storm. It was the sharp, violent sound of something arriving. When Silas forced the door open against the gale, he found the source huddled in the wreckage, a creature of cream fur and terrified, golden eyes that were decidedly not human. He took a deliberate step inside, pulling the heavy garage door against the wind's fury. It slammed shut with a muffled thud, plunging the space into a dim quiet broken only by the drumming of rain on the roof. The air was thick with the scent of wet concrete and splintered wood. A set of metal shelves had collapsed, spilling a lifetime of tools and forgotten projects across the floor. And in the center of the mess, she remained perfectly still, a knot of cream-colored fur and drenched fabric. Her head was low, but her large, golden eyes tracked his every move. They were not the eyes of an animal. They held a terrifying, intelligent clarity. Her ears, elegant and pointed, twitched at the sound of his boots on the floor. Silas stopped, holding his hands up, palms open. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice low and steady. The words were for his own benefit as much as hers, a way to anchor himself in the impossible reality of the moment. She flinched, pulling her knees tighter to her chest. A soft, guttural sound escaped her, a whimper that was part warning and part plea. He saw the tremor that ran through her body, a violent shiver born of cold and fear. The coat she wore, made of a material he didn't recognize, was ripped at the shoulder, and a dark stain that wasn't rainwater was spreading near her arm. He needed to think. Panic was a useless luxury. She was hurt, freezing, and terrified. His mind, usually occupied with engine schematics and construction permits, now focused on a new problem. He gave her one last, reassuring look before backing away. He turned the handle and slipped back into the house, securing the door behind him. The warmth and light of his kitchen felt like another world. For a moment he leaned against the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was a practical man. He fixed what was broken, planned for contingencies, and faced problems with logic. But there was no manual for this. He pushed off the door and moved with purpose. From the hall closet, he grabbed the thickest wool blanket he owned. In the kitchen, he filled a stainless steel thermos with warm water from the tap, deliberately avoiding making it too hot. Returning to the garage felt like crossing a threshold. He opened the door slowly, calling out a gentle, "I'm coming back in. It's okay." She hadn't moved. Her golden eyes snapped to him, wide and wary. He knelt down about 10 feet away from her, careful to keep his movements slow and predictable. He placed the thermos on the concrete floor and slid it gently across the smooth surface until it stopped a few feet from her. Then he unfolded the heavy blanket, the dark green wool a stark contrast to her pale fur. He held it out, an offering. "Here," he said softly, "you're freezing." She watched him, her gaze flicking between his face and the blanket. Her chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. He saw the internal battle she was fighting, the primal instinct to flee warring with the desperate need for warmth. Slowly, hesitantly, she extended a hand. It was slender, with long fingers ending in dark, well-kept nails, but it was her trembling that caught his attention. She reached for the thermos first. As she leaned forward, her torn coat gaped open. Something small and metallic slipped from an inner pocket, clattering onto the floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet garage. It was an ornate device, made of a spiraling, coppery metal he had never seen before. A network of fine, crystalline wires was visible through a crack in its casing, some of them snapped and broken. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. A sharp cry tore from her throat as she lunged for it, a desperate, clumsy movement. But Silas was closer. He instinctively reached down and scooped it up. The object was surprisingly light, and a faint warmth pulsed from it into his palm. He looked at it for a second, then back to her. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by something far more potent, pure, undiluted panic. It wasn't just an object. It was her lifeline. He saw it then. This was not a monster to be feared. This was a refugee, a survivor, someone who had lost everything and was now clinging to the last broken piece of her world. A powerful, unexplainable wave of protectiveness washed over him, settling deep in his bones. He was a man who fixed things, and this was a situation more broken than any he had ever faced. He held out his hands. In one, the warm, broken device. In the other, the heavy, dry blanket, an offer, a choice. Her gaze locked with his, and for the first time the terror in her golden eyes softened, replaced by a flicker of uncertain hope. She took the blanket first, her slender fingers brushing against his. The touch was brief, but it sent a strange warmth through him that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside. She wrapped the thick wool around her shoulders, a soft sigh of relief escaping her lips. Then, with a caution that spoke of deep-seated fear, she accepted the broken device, cradling it against her chest like a fragile treasure. Silas gestured with his head toward the house. "Let's get you inside. It's warmer." Her golden eyes searched his, questioning the offer. He understood. The garage was a wreck, but it was also a hiding place. The house was his territory, an unknown risk. He gave her a small, reassuring nod and took a slow step back, giving her space to make the choice. After a long moment, she rose to her feet, pulling the blanket tighter. Her movements were stiff, pained, but she followed him. He led her through the kitchen and into the living room, the quiet hum of the generator a stark contrast to the wind's howl. He pointed to the worn leather armchair by the fireplace, where he'd already laid out a fire. "Sit. I'll get you something dry to wear." She watched him go, her gaze tracking every move. He returned with a thick gray sweatshirt and a pair of sweatpants, placing them on the ottoman. He kept his back to her to offer a sense of privacy as she changed. He heard the soft rustle of fabric, and when he turned back, she was enveloped in his clothes, looking small and lost. The wet, torn coat lay in a heap on the floor. He took a seat on the hearth, a safe distance away. "I'm Silas," he said, pointing to his chest. He repeated the name slowly. She watched his lips, then pointed a trembling finger to her own. "Lyra," she whispered. The name was soft, melodic, and held a hint of an accent he couldn't place. It was the first clear word she had spoken. "Lyra," he repeated, testing the sound. A flicker of something, gratitude, maybe relief, crossed her face. He went to the kitchen and returned with a bowl of warm soup. He set it on the small table beside her. She looked at it, then at him. He picked up his own bowl from the counter and took a sip, showing her it was safe. She ate with a ravenous hunger that spoke of long hardship, her eyes never leaving him. When she was finished, she set the bowl down and held up the broken device in her hands. She tapped the cracked casing, her expression turning urgent. "Kale," she said, the word a harsh, guttural sound, nothing like her name. She made a sharp, hunting gesture with her hands like claws closing in. Then she pointed to the sky, then to the floor, mimicking a fall. Silas leaned forward, trying to piece it together. "The Kale, they're after you, they caused this." He gestured to her and the device. She nodded vigorously, her golden eyes wide with a fear he was beginning to recognize. She spoke again, a cascade of her own language, the sounds fluid but incomprehensible. Seeing his confusion, she stopped. She held the device out to him again, her gaze pleading. He took it gently. Now in the better light, he could see the true complexity of its design. The coppery metal was seamless, molded in a way no earthly forge could replicate. The crystalline wires inside were finer than hair, arranged in patterns that seemed more grown than built. Several of them were severed. He saw a small power cell, its light dim and flickering. He looked from the intricate alien technology to her hopeful, desperate face. He was a mechanic, a man who fixed engines and restored classic cars. This was far beyond his expertise, but he also saw the logic in its construction, the flow of energy, the points of failure. The principles were the same, even if the materials were from another world. "I can try," he said, more to himself than to her. "I can try to fix it." Her head tilted, and though she didn't understand the words, she seemed to grasp his intent. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. He stood and walked to the sturdy oak table in the corner of the room, clearing a space. He retrieved his precision tool kit, the one he used for delicate electronics. He laid out a soft cloth and placed the device upon it, then switched on a bright desk lamp, its beam illuminating the damage. Lyra rose from the chair and came to stand beside him, watching with rapt attention. He picked up a pair of fine-tipped tweezers, his hand steady. "All right," he murmured, his focus narrowing. "Let's see what we're working with." He felt her presence at his side, a silent partner in this impossible task. The storm raged on, but inside the small circle of light, a fragile alliance was being forged, built on a broken piece of technology and a shared moment of desperation. For the first time, he felt the true weight of her trust, and he was determined not to fail it. He gently probed a severed crystalline wire with the tip of his tweezers. It was like trying to operate on a spider's web. Beside him, Lyra flinched with every move he made, as if the device were an extension of her own body. He paused and looked at her. Her gold eyes were wide, fixed on his hands. He gave her a small, reassuring nod before turning back to his work. The internal structure was a puzzle. Energy seemed to flow not in straight lines but in spirals. He traced the path from the failing power cell, knotting the breaks. He needed something conductive but incredibly fine to bridge the gaps. He thought of the single-strand copper filaments he used for custom circuit boards. It was a long shot. "I need to connect these," he said, pointing from one broken wire to another. Lyra leaned closer. She touched a spot on the device's casing, then pointed to the power cell. A soft, musical word escaped her lips. "Valen," she said. Then she traced a line from the cell to a cluster of dark, inert crystals. "Kale." She made a slicing motion with her hand at the severed wires, her expression hardening. He understood. The Kale had damaged the Valen, the power source. It was sabotage, not an accident. This was more than a simple repair job, it was an act of defiance. The thought settled in his chest, heavy and solid. He was no longer just helping a stranger. He was picking a side. He retrieved a spool of the fine copper filament and a micro-soldering iron. The work was painstaking. He held his breath, guiding the filament to bridge the first gap. A tiny spark flared as the connection was made. Lyra gasped softly. The power cell's light steadied, glowing a little brighter. One down, several more to go. They fell into a silent rhythm. He would work, and she would watch, her presence a steadying weight at his side. The storm outside began to lose its fury, its roars softening to a distant grumble. In the quiet of the house, the only sounds were the soft clicks of his tools and their shared breathing. A sudden, loud knock on the front door shattered the peace. Both of them froze. Lyra's fur bristled, and she instinctively moved behind him, her eyes darting towards the door like a cornered animal. Silas felt a surge of adrenaline. No one should be out in this weather. He put a calming hand on her arm. "Stay here," he whispered, though she couldn't understand the words. He pointed at her, then at the chair, holding up a finger for her to wait. He moved to the door, peering through the peephole. A familiar, rain-slicked jacket. Corbin, his neighbor and oldest friend. Relief washed over him, quickly followed by a new wave of anxiety. He couldn't just turn him away, but he couldn't let him see Lyra. He opened the door a crack. "Corbin, what are you doing out here?" "Making sure a tree didn't fall on your house," Corbin said, his voice cheerful despite the wind whipping around him. "Power's out on my block." "You good?" He tried to peer past Silas into the warm light of the living room. "You got a fire going. Smells like you're burning something." Silas realized he must smell the solder, just some electronics work. "I'm fine, really. Thanks for checking." "You sure? I brought a thermos of coffee. Figured we could wait out the last of this beast together." Corbin's friendly persistence was usually a comfort. Tonight, it was a liability. Silas knew he had a choice: lie to his best friend or trust him with an impossible truth. He looked back over his shoulder. Lyra was peeking from behind the armchair, her fear palpable. Lying felt like a betrayal not just of Corbin, but of the strange new reality he now inhabited. He sighed and opened the door wider. "All right, come in, but you have to be quiet, and you have to keep an open mind." Corbin stepped inside, shaking water from his coat. Open mind about what? Did you finally adopt that stray cat you've been feeding? He stopped dead. His gaze fell upon Lyra. His smile vanished, replaced by sheer disbelief. He looked from the cream-furred, golden-eyed woman to Silas, his mouth slightly agape. "Silas," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "what is going on?" Lyra tensed, ready to bolt. "Her name is Lyra," Silas said calmly, stepping between them. "She crashed. She's hurt and she needs my help. Your help too, if you're willing." Corbin stared for a long moment, his mind clearly racing. He was a practical man, a surveyor who believed in maps and solid ground. This defied everything he knew. But then his eyes met Silas's, and he saw the unwavering resolve there. He had known Silas his entire life. He trusted him completely. He let out a slow breath and ran a hand through his wet hair. "Crashed, like from up there." He gestured vaguely toward the ceiling. Silas nodded. "She's being hunted." Corbin looked at Lyra again, this time with less shock and more concern. He saw the fear in her posture, the exhaustion in her eyes. "Okay," he said, his voice firm. "Okay, what do you need?" The relief was so immense it almost made Silas dizzy. "I'm trying to fix this," he said, leading Corbin to the table. "It's how she communicates, how she gets home." Corbin leaned over the device, whistling softly. Never seen anything like it. He pointed at Silas's setup. "You need a third hand." As Silas went to explain the next connection, his hand slipped, and the sharp edge of the tool grazed Lyra's arm, which was resting near the device. A thin line of red appeared on her furred skin. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Silas said, reaching for a cloth. But before he could, Lyra simply placed her other hand over the cut. She held it there for a second. When she pulled it away, both Silas and Corbin stared. The skin was completely unmarked. There was no blood, no wound, not even a scratch. Corbin looked at Silas, his eyes wide with a new level of understanding. "Right," he said, his voice filled with awe. "Whatever you need, man, I'm in." Silas met Lyra's gaze. A small, grateful smile touched her lips. The alliance had grown. He picked up his tool again, his focus renewed. With Corbin holding a small flashlight for a better angle, he made the final connection. The device pulsed with a soft, blue light, and a single, clear chime echoed through the room. It wasn't fully repaired, but it was alive. In the quiet glow, the three of them stood together, a small pocket of hope against the fading storm. The soft blue light from the device cast long shadows across the living room. Lyra reached out a trembling hand, her fingertips hovering just above the glowing surface. She looked at Silas, her golden eyes shimmering with a hope so profound it felt like a physical presence in the room. "Is that it? Is it working?" Corbin asked, his voice a low whisper. Before Silas could answer, a faint holographic image flickered into existence above the device. It was a swirling cloud of star systems, rendered in delicate lines of blue and white light. Lyra's breath hitched. With a single, graceful movement, she touched one point of light. A line shot out from it, connecting to a dozen others, then 100. She then traced a path across the star-strewn map to a brilliant green nebula at the far edge. She pointed to a single star within it, then tapped her own chest. "Veridia," Silas murmured, understanding instantly. "Her home." A genuine smile, the first he had truly seen, transformed her face. She turned to thank him, but her expression froze. The blue light of the map suddenly warped, turning a harsh, pulsing crimson. A low, discordant tone replaced the gentle chime. "What's happening?" Corbin took a step back. Lyra's hands flew to the device, her fingers moving rapidly over its surface. She shook her head, her earlier hope replaced with stark terror. She looked at Silas, her eyes wide with panic. She pointed at the device, then held up two fingers. She jabbed one finger toward the glowing map, representing her allies. Then she jabbed the other finger in the opposite direction, into the darkness of the room, and made a clawing motion with her hand. The signal, Silas realized, his blood running cold. It went both ways. It called for help, but it also gave away our position. As if on cue, A new sound cut through the quiet patter of the fading rain. It wasn't the violent crash of Lyra's arrival, but the precise, nearly silent hiss of a craft settling onto the damp earth of his backyard. There was no impact, only the subtle displacement of air. Corbin moved instinctively toward the window, but Silas put a hand on his arm. "Don't. If they're hostile, they're watching." They stood frozen in the crimson glow, a triangle of uncertainty. The front doorknob turned with a quiet metallic click. The lock, which Silas knew for a fact was bolted, disengaged without a sound. The door swung inward, revealing a woman standing on the threshold. She was tall and slender, dressed in a form-fitting, dark gray suit that seemed to absorb the light. Her hair was cut short, and her features were sharp and intelligent. She looked human, but her stillness was absolute, her gaze unnervingly direct. The woman's eyes found Lyra instantly. She spoke, and the language was a fluid cascade of soft clicks and resonant vowels. Lyra answered in the same tongue, a wave of relief washing over her as she took a step forward. The newcomer held up a hand, a silent command for Lyra to stay put. Her attention then shifted to Silas and Corbin, her eyes assessing them in a fraction of a second. When she spoke again, her English was perfect, devoid of any accent. "You are Silas, and you are Corbin," she stated, not asked. "I am Maeve. Thank you for protecting her." "Who are you?" Silas asked, moving to stand slightly in front of Lyra. His protective instinct was afire in his chest. "I am the help she called for," Maeve replied, her expression unreadable. She stepped inside, the door closing silently behind her. She gestured toward the red glowing device. "You did well to reactivate the beacon, but you have also activated a Kale tracker embedded within its core systems, a failsafe, in case it fell into the wrong hands." Kale, Corbin repeated the name Lyra had tried to communicate earlier. "The ones hunting her." "They are not hunters," Maeve corrected, her tone sharp as cut glass. "They are conquerors, and they are efficient. Their primary scout vessel entered the upper atmosphere 40 seconds ago. They will deploy a ground team to this location in less than 1 hour." The weight of her words settled over the room, extinguishing the last embers of their small victory. 1 hour. They had barely managed to fix a single device, and now a hostile force was descending upon them. Silas thought of his workshop, his tools, the quiet life he had built. It all seemed impossibly fragile now. What does she have that they want so badly? Maeve's gaze softened almost imperceptibly as she looked at Lyra. "Knowledge. Data that proves the Kale Collective has violated every treaty in the known sectors. It details their plan to seize control of a resource that would give them unchecked power." She looked back at Silas. "She is not just a refugee. She is the key to preventing a war that would consume thousands of worlds, including, eventually, this one." Silas met Lyra's eyes. He saw not just a frightened survivor but a soldier carrying the fate of galaxies. His resolve hardened. He had not invited this fight, but it had landed in his garage, and he would not turn away from it. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. 1 hour, what's the plan?" Maeve gave a slight nod of approval, a flicker of respect in her otherwise stoic eyes. "The plan is to ensure the Kale leave here empty-handed. You two have already proven to be unexpectedly capable. I believe you can help me do that." Maeve's focus was immediate and absolute. She pointed to the large bay window in the living room. "That is your primary vulnerability. They will not use explosives. Too loud, too much attention. They prefer silent entry." "My workshop," Silas said, his mind already cataloging its contents. "I have steel plates, a plasma cutter, high-tensile cabling." "Good," Maeve acknowledged, her eyes scanning the room's layout. "Corbin, you have a military background, correct? I detected it in your stance." Corbin looked surprised but nodded. "Reservist, communications." "Excellent, you will monitor their comms. They will use a tight beam frequency, but it will have bleed. I have a decryptor." She produced a small, silver cylinder from her belt and tossed it to him. It was no bigger than his thumb. It will interface with any standard display. As Corbin moved to Silas's computer, Maeve turned back to Silas. The steel plates. We use them to reinforce the front and back doors. Forget the windows. We will make them fatal funnels. Lyra stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. They use thermal imaging, but their scanners cannot penetrate layered metallic alloys. Your kitchen. The reflective surfaces of your appliances might confuse their initial scans. Silas looked from Lyra to his kitchen, seeing the stainless steel refrigerator and oven in a new light. We can move them. Create a barrier. It was a crazy idea, but in this new reality it felt practical. Do it, Maeve commanded. Lyra, with me. Show me the device's energy signature. We need to mask it before they can get a direct lock. The four of them moved with a shared, unspoken urgency. Silas and Corbin grunted as they pushed the heavy refrigerator across the floor, angling it to block the hallway leading from the back of the house. The metal scraped against the wood, a harsh sound in the tense quiet. Silas glanced into his workshop, the place of methodical repairs and familiar problems. Now he was grabbing a welding mask and a power pack, preparing to turn his home into a fortress. He felt a strange surge, not of fear, but of focused purpose. He was a builder, a fixer. This was just a different kind of problem. 40 minutes, Corbin called out from the computer desk. The decryptor is working. I'm getting whispers, coded chatter. They're deploying in three-person cells. Lyra and Maeve were hunched over the beacon. Maeve was attaching small nodes to its surface, while Lyra guided her hands, murmuring in her own language. The device's threatening red glow softened to a muted blue. The signature is shielded, Maeve announced. They can no longer pinpoint it. They will have to search room by room. That was the best news they had received all night. It bought them a fighting chance. Silas finished welding a steel plate over the back door's weakest points. He felt a light touch on his arm and turned. Lyra stood there, holding out a glass of water. Her golden eyes held no terror now, only a deep, steady strength that mirrored his own. Thank you, she said, her voice barely a whisper, for not turning me away. There was never a choice, Silas replied, his voice low. He took the glass and their fingers brushed. A current passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had formed in the storm and was now being forged in fire. He saw her not as an alien, but as the reason this fight mattered. He wanted to say more, to tell her that the thought of them taking her was unacceptable, but the words felt clumsy. Instead, he just held her gaze, hoping she understood. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She understood. 10 minutes, Corbin warned, his voice tight. They're close, very close. I'm picking up local energy fluctuations. They're cloaked, but they're displacing the air. Positions, Maeve ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. She held a compact weapon that had appeared from her coat, its design sleek and efficient. She handed a similar, smaller one to Silas. Non-lethal. It emits a sonic pulse that incapacitates their nervous systems. Aim for the center of mass. Silas took the device. It felt heavy, solid, and completely alien in his hand. He and Corbin dragged a heavy oak table on its side, creating a shield near the reinforced front door. Maeve took a position where she could see both the main hallway and the large, darkened window. Lyra crouched behind the makeshift barrier of kitchen appliances, the now shielded beacon clutched tightly in her hands. The house fell silent. The only sound was the low hum of the computer and their own ragged breaths. The familiar comfort of Silas's home was gone, replaced by a battlefield of shadows and angles. He glanced at Corbin, who gave him a grim, determined nod. He looked at Lyra, a fierce protectiveness rising in his chest. Contact, Corbin breathed, pointing at the monitor. One of the energy signatures just went stationary. Front lawn. Maeve raised her weapon, her body perfectly still. A faint scraping sound came from the roof, then another from the side of the house. They were not coming through the doors. They were surrounding them, testing for weaknesses, their patience as silent and deadly as their approach. Silas tightened his grip on the sonic weapon. He was a mechanic, not a soldier, but this was his home, and she was his to protect. He aimed toward the large window, his heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs, waiting for the shadows to move. The fight had come to him, and he was ready. The large window did not shatter. It simply dissolved into a cloud of shimmering dust, the glass vanishing without a sound. Two figures, clad in matte black armor that drank the faint moonlight, vaulted through the empty frame. They moved with a liquid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. Maeve was already firing before they landed. A high-frequency pulse, invisible to the eye, shot from her weapon. The first invader crumpled midair, its limbs locking up as it hit the floor in a heap. The second one twisted, avoiding the initial blast, and raised a weapon of its own. Silas reacted on pure instinct. He aimed his heavier sonic device and fired. The pulse struck the invader in the chest. The figure froze, armor smoking slightly, then fell backward onto the lawn, twitching. He had not expected it to work so cleanly. A wave of adrenaline surged through him, sharp and cold. Back door, Corbin snapped, his eyes glued to the monitor. 3 of them. They just bypassed the lock. "Silas, with me," Maeve commanded, already moving toward the kitchen. He followed, his feet sure on the familiar floorboards. He knew this space, every creak and shadow. As they entered the kitchen, the back door swung inward. 3 more armored figures filled the doorway. Maeve took out the first with another precise shot. A second lunged, not at her, but at the makeshift barrier where Lyra was hiding. Silas saw the movement, the clear threat to her. He did not think. He raised his weapon and fired again, but the invader deflected the pulse with a gauntlet that glowed a faint blue. It kept coming. Lyra looked up, her golden eyes wide with fear, not for herself, but for him. "Lyra, stay down," Silas yelled, stepping between her and the attacker. The Kale warrior swung its weapon, a short metallic baton at his head. Silas ducked, bringing up his sonic device like a club. He slammed it against the invader's elbow joint. There was a sharp crack of alien alloy and the arm went limp. The warrior staggered back, surprised by the raw, physical resistance. Before it could recover, Lyra extended a hand from behind the barrier. The beacon in her other hand flared with a soft light. A wave of shimmering energy, almost like heat haze, washed over the Kale. The warrior's helmet display flickered and went dark. Disoriented, it stumbled, giving Maeve the opening she needed. Her weapon pulsed, and the third figure dropped silently beside its comrades. "What was that?" Silas asked, breathing heavily as he looked back at Lyra. "A focus disruption," Lyra said, her voice strained. "It overloads their suit's sensory input. I cannot do it often." He felt a surge of pride and concern. She was not helpless. She was fighting alongside them. He offered her a hand, and she took it, her fingers gripping his tightly for a moment before she let go. "They're pulling back," Corbin announced from the living room. "The signatures are retreating to the edge of the property." Maeve cautiously checked the windows, her weapon still raised. They were testing our defenses, seeing what we had and how we would react. She turned to Silas, her expression unreadable. "Your unconventional defense was effective. They expected energy weapons, not a direct physical strike to a weak point." Silas just nodded, his heart still hammering. He glanced at the dent in his sonic weapon where it had connected with the armor, a mechanic's instinct, finding the flaw in the machine. He had seen the stress lines on the joint and aimed for them. "They know our positions now," Maeve continued, her voice low and serious. "They know we have non-lethal sonic tech and that Lyra can interfere with their systems. The next attack will not be a simple probe. They will come to overwhelm us." Silas looked around his home. The dissolved window, the silent, armored figures lying on his floor and lawn. It was a violation, a tearing of the veil between his simple life and the vast, dangerous galaxy that Lyra had fallen from. He did not feel fear, not anymore. He felt a cold, hard resolve solidifying in his chest. He met Lyra's gaze across the room. In her eyes, he saw not a terrified refugee, but a partner. She had fought for him as fiercely as he had for her. The unspoken promise that had passed between them in the garage had now been forged in combat. "Let them come," Silas said, his voice steady. He picked up the heavy oak table and set it back upright, the wood scraping against the floor. "We'll be ready." Corbin looked up from his monitor, a grim smile on his face. "My scans are clear for now. We have some time. Let's make it count." Maeve gave a sharp nod of approval. The first test was over. They had held their ground, not just as individuals, but as a unit. The quiet of the house returned, but it was different now. It was the calm of a fortress, its defenders waiting for the final siege to begin. The silence lasted for 7 minutes. Corbin counted them on his monitor. "They're regrouping," he announced, his voice tight. "And they're adapting. I'm seeing energy fluctuations gathering around the property's perimeter. It looks like they're going to try to overload the local power grid." Maeve moved to the main circuit breaker panel near the kitchen. "If they cut the power, our defenses go down. The sonic emitters need a steady draw. Silas, the workshop has an independent generator, right?" "It does," Silas confirmed, already moving toward the basement door. "But the main house isn't wired to it. I'd have to run a bypass cable manually." "Then you and I will do that," Maeve said, grabbing a heavy-duty power conduit from a supply bag she had brought. "Corbin, keep Lyra safe. Lock this door behind us. Do not open it until you hear my voice." Lyra watched Silas go, a flicker of fear in her golden eyes. He gave her a quick, reassuring nod before disappearing down the stairs with Maeve. Corbin slid a heavy bolt across the door, then turned back to his screens, his fingers flying across the interface. "They're making their move," he said. "The energy surge is starting." Upstairs, a window on the second floor shattered inward, not from a projectile, but from a focused vibration that turned the glass to powder. 2 Kale invaders dropped silently into the hallway, their movements fluid and predatory. They ignored Corbin and Lyra, their metallic heads turning to scan for the device. Lyra clutched the data beacon to her chest. Corbin spun from his chair, leveling his sonic weapon. He fired a compressed wave that sent the first invader stumbling back, its armor resonating with a discordant clang. The second one, however, adjusted its suit's frequency, the sound wave washing over it with little effect. It was learning. It lunged for Lyra. She scrambled backward, tripping over a rug. The data beacon flew from her grasp, skittering across the polished hardwood floor and coming to a stop near the base of the stairs. The Kale soldier ignored her, its sole focus now on the prize. It took a heavy step toward the device. Corbin fired again, but the soldier braced itself, the sonic blast barely slowing its advance. Just then the basement door burst open. Silas took in the scene in a fraction of a second, Corbin holding off one attacker, Lyra on the floor, and the second Kale reaching for the beacon. There was no time to think. He moved on pure instinct. He launched himself forward in a low slide, his work boots finding purchase on the smooth wood. He shot across the floor, snatching the device just as the Kale's armored fingers were about to close around it. His momentum carried him into the soldier's leg, knocking it off balance with a heavy thud. The first soldier, recovering from Corbin's blast, turned its weapon on Silas, but before it could fire, Maeve was there. She had come up the stairs behind him, silent as a shadow. She slammed the butt of her rifle into the joint at the back of the soldier's knee, then brought it up in a swift arc that connected with its helmet. The armored figure crumpled. The soldier Silas had tripped was already pushing itself up. Lyra, seeing her chance, pressed her palm against the floor. A pulse of faint, golden light emanated from her, not an attack, but a wave of pure information. The Kale's suit systems flickered and died. It froze mid-motion, its internal mechanics silenced. The house fell quiet again. Outside, Corbin's monitor showed the energy signatures receding once more. The second wave had failed. Silas pushed himself to his feet, the data beacon clutched tightly in his hand. He was breathing heavily, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He looked at the device, its smooth, alien metal cool against his skin. It was the reason for all of this, the key to a galactic war he couldn't comprehend. But in that moment, it was just the thing she needed. He walked over to Lyra and knelt, holding it out to her. Their eyes met. The fear was gone from her gaze, replaced by something deep and overwhelming. Gratitude, relief, and a warmth that had nothing to do with the battle they had just survived. She reached out, her slender fingers closing over his as she took the beacon. She did not let go. That was a calculated risk, Maeve said, her voice betraying a hint of admiration. You prioritized the data. Silas didn't take his eyes off Lyra. I prioritized her mission, he corrected softly. It's a part of her. I couldn't let them take it. Lyra's grip on his hand tightened, a silent confirmation that he understood completely. In his world, he fixed engines. He understood that some parts were irreplaceable. He had seen the desperation in her eyes when she first crashed, a desperation not just for her own life, but for the information she carried. By saving the device, he had saved a piece of her soul. Corbin let out a long, slow breath. They'll be back, and they know our tricks now. He's right, Maeve agreed, already checking her weapon. They won't be testing us anymore. They will level this place if they have to. We can't stay here. Silas finally looked away from Lyra, though her hand remained in his. He looked around his home, a place of quiet solitude that had become a fortress and now a trap. He felt no regret. His simple life was gone, replaced by a purpose he had never asked for but now fully embraced. He squeezed Lyra's hand, a silent promise. They had won the battle. Now they had to find a way to win the war. My truck, Silas said, his voice firm. It's in the garage. They haven't breached it yet. We can make it to the old access roads before they realize we're mobile. Maeve nodded, her gaze sweeping over the wrecked living room. They have the house surrounded, but their focus is on entry points. A rapid exit might catch them off guard. Corbin, can you get a read on their positions? Corbin was already tapping at his datapad, his brow furrowed in concentration. They're tightening the perimeter. 2 units moving toward the back, probably to check on their disabled comrades. But the garage side is clear for now. It won't be for long. We go now, Maeve declared. Grab only what you need. We move fast and quiet. Lyra looked at Silas, her golden eyes wide with a new kind of fear, not for herself, but for him. She held the beacon against her chest, a silent weight of responsibility. He saw the question in her expression, the worry that he was leaving his entire world behind. He gave her hand one last squeeze before letting go. It's just a house, he said, his voice low and meant only for her. You are what matters. A faint blush colored the fur on her cheeks. She gave a small, determined nod. They moved through the kitchen, the silence punctuated only by the crunch of broken glass under their boots. Silas led the way, his movements sure and familiar in the darkness. He held the door to the garage, peering into the shadows. His truck, a sturdy and reliable machine he had rebuilt himself, stood like a steel beast waiting to be unleashed. Corbin, you're on lookout, Maeve whispered, handing him a small scanner. Signal us if anything changes. Silas, get it started. Lyra, stay with me. Silas slid into the driver's seat, the worn leather a small comfort. He inserted the key, but paused, his hand hovering over the ignition. Starting the engine would be a dinner bell, announcing their escape plan to every Kale in the vicinity. Once I turn this key, we'll have less than a minute, he said, looking back at Maeve and Lyra as they climbed into the extended cab. That's all we'll need, Maeve replied, checking the charge on her weapon. Suddenly, Corbin's voice came through their communicators, tight with alarm. Movement, above you, something big just decloaked. Silas didn't hesitate. He twisted the key. The engine roared to life, a defiant shout in the night. He slammed the gearshift into reverse and hit the garage door opener. The heavy door groaned as it began to lift, revealing the storm-swept driveway. But they were too late. A brilliant, pale green light flooded the garage, pouring down from an unseen source directly overhead. It was not a searchlight. It was focused, precise, and utterly silent. The light enveloped Lyra, lifting her from the seat as if she weighed nothing. She cried out, not in pain but in shock. Her hands flew to the beacon, her one instinct to protect it. "Silas," she yelled, her voice filled with panic. He lunged for her, his fingers brushing against her arm, but the beam held her fast. It was like trying to grab smoke. Maeve fired her weapon into the light, but the energy blasts dissipated harmlessly before they could reach the source. Lyra looked down at him, her expression a mix of terror and resolve. With a final, desperate effort, she shoved the data beacon from her own hands into his. "Keep it safe," she pleaded, her voice echoing strangely in the focused light. Her fingers slipped away from his. The beam retracted, pulling her upward through the roof of the garage with a soft whoosh of displaced air. Metal groaned and tore as the invisible force ripped a clean hole through the shingles and wood. And then she was gone. The green light vanished. The roar of the truck's engine seemed obscenely loud in the sudden, terrible silence. Rain began to fall through the new hole in the roof, pattering onto the empty space where Lyra had been just seconds before. Silas stood frozen, his hand outstretched, clutching the beacon. It felt cold, a dead weight in his palm. He stared up at the torn roof, at the dark, indifferent sky beyond. The weight of his failure pressed down on him, heavier than any physical blow. He had promised to protect her, and she had been taken right in front of him. Corbin ran into the garage, his face pale. "The ship is gone. It just vanished." Maeve lowered her weapon, her professional calm finally cracking. A flicker of raw fury crossed her face before she suppressed it. She looked at Silas, at the device in his hand, and then at the empty space beside him. "They didn't want the data," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "They wanted her." Silas slowly lowered his hand, his knuckles white as he gripped the beacon. He didn't look at Maeve or Corbin. He just stared at the empty seat in his truck. His simple life was gone. His home was a trap. And now the one thing that had given it all purpose had been violently torn away. A cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of his stomach, displacing the shock and grief. They had made a grave mistake. They had taken her, but they had left him behind. He did not move until Maeve's hand touched his shoulder. "Silas, we have to leave. This location is compromised." Her voice was steady, cutting through the fog of his shock. He finally looked away from the hole in the roof and met her gaze. The professional calm was back in her eyes, but underneath it was a shared fire. They had taken one of hers. "Get in the truck," Silas said, his own voice sounding distant and flat. He slid into the driver's seat, the cold metal of the beacon a painful reminder in his hand. Corbin was already in the passenger seat, his expression grim. Maeve slipped into the back, a compact datapad already glowing in her hands. Silas reversed the truck out of the ruined garage without a backward glance. He drove through the rain-slicked streets, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The quiet inside the cab was heavy with unspoken failure and simmering rage. "They can't have gone far," Maeve said from the back. "A short-range jump like that leaves a distinct energy residue. I'm scanning for it." "Where are we going?" Corbin asked, his eyes scanning the road ahead as if expecting another attack at any moment. "Your workshop," Silas answered, making a sharp turn. "It has its own power grid. And steel walls. It's more defensible than my house ever was." Corbin nodded, understanding. "Good call." Silas focused on driving. His mind kept replaying the image of Lyra's face, the terror mixed with a fierce, protective resolve as she pushed the beacon into his hand. She had trusted him. She had chosen to save the data over herself, and he had let her be taken. The guilt was a physical weight, but beneath it something else was taking root. A cold, clear certainty. He was going to get her back. It was no longer a mission he had fallen into. It was the only thing that mattered. They reached the industrial park where Corbin ran his auto repair business. The metal roll-up door of the main bay hissed open and then shut behind them, sealing them inside the cavernous space. The smell of oil and metal was a strangely comforting anchor to reality. Maeve was out of the truck before it had fully stopped, moving to a workbench. She connected her datapad to a portable power source and began running diagnostics. Their cloaking is good, but it's not perfect. It bleeds energy when stressed. The abduction, the atmospheric entry, the rapid ascent, it all leaves a trail. Silas placed the beacon on the workbench next to her equipment. He looked at the device, then at his own hands. They were mechanics' hands, good for fixing engines and building things. Now they felt useless. "What do they want with her?" Silas asked, his voice rough. "You said they wanted the data." Maeve didn't look up from her screen. "They do. The data is encrypted with a biological key. It's tied to her unique neural patterns. The beacon is just the storage medium. The key is Lyra herself." Corbin moved to stand beside Silas. "What does that mean?" A schematic appeared on Maeve's screen, a faint red line arcing across a local map. "It means they can't just download it. They have to extract it directly from her mind." Her fingers flew across the screen. "The process is brutal. It destroys neural pathways. If they complete it, even if she survives, she won't be Lyra anymore." The cold certainty in Silas's gut hardened into ice. The thought of them hurting her, of erasing the person he had come to know, was unbearable. He felt a surge of possessive fury that startled him with its intensity. "I have them," Maeve announced, her voice tight. "They've set up a temporary base in the old shipping warehouse district by the docks. They're preparing the extraction equipment now." She finally looked up, her gaze locking with Silas's. "My people are too far away. We are on our own, and we have very little time." Silas picked up a heavy wrench from the workbench, feeling its solid weight. He wasn't a soldier. He was a man who fixed things that were broken, and right now everything felt broken. But he knew with absolute clarity what he had to do. "Then we're going in," he said. It wasn't a question. Corbin stepped forward, grabbing a thick metal pry bar. "Just tell us what to do." Maeve studied them both for a long moment. She saw no hesitation, no fear, only raw determination. She saw the same look in Silas's eyes that she had seen in the best soldiers she had ever served with. A slight, approving nod was her only reply. "All right," she said, turning back to the map on her screen. "They'll have perimeter sensors and armed guards, but they think they've won. They'll be arrogant." She began pulling up structural blueprints of the warehouse, and every fortress has a weakness. Silas looked down at the beacon in his hand, then at the determined faces of his friends. The grief was still there, a hollow ache in his chest, but it was now fuel for a singular purpose. They had taken Lyra from him. He was going to take her back. His life had been simple and quiet before she fell from the sky. Now it was pointed, sharp, and aimed directly at the heart of the enemy. The drive to the docks was silent and fast. Silas gripped the steering wheel of his truck, the worn leather a familiar comfort in a world that had become dangerously alien. Corbin sat beside him, checking the charge on a pair of sonic stunners Maeve had produced from a hidden compartment in her gear. In the back seat, Maeve monitored the datapad, her face illuminated by the cool blue light of the warehouse schematics. The city lights blurred past them, streaks of color in the rain-slicked darkness. "Perimeter is active," Maeve said, her voice cutting through the low rumble of the engine. "Standard energy fencing, motion sensors at 20-meter intervals, and 2 visible patrols." She zoomed in on a section of the building. "They're using the main loading bay as their entry point. Too obvious. We're going in through the maintenance access on the north wall." She pointed to a spot on the screen. "Corbin, you'll create a diversion at the south substation. Overload the power grid. It will cause a temporary blackout and draw the patrols. That's our window." "Just like blowing a fuse, but bigger," Corbin said, sliding a stunner into his jacket. "I can do that." Maeve continued, her eyes meeting his in the rearview mirror. The access door is magnetically locked and tied into their system. The blackout won't affect it. You'll have to bypass it manually. The schematics show an external power conduit 4 feet to the left of the door. Can you splice it to force the lock? Silas thought of the countless complex engine systems he had rewired. This was just another machine. A more dangerous one, but a machine nonetheless. I can. His own certainty surprised him. He wasn't a soldier, but his hands knew how to take things apart and put them back together. He would take their fortress apart, piece by piece, until he got to Lyra. He parked the truck 2 blocks away, hidden in the shadow of a derelict fishery. The salty air was heavy with the smell of rust and low tide. They moved on foot, dark shapes against the looming metal structures of the warehouse district. Maeve led the way, her movements fluid and silent. At the edge of the property, she held up a hand. "Corbin, your target is 100 meters that way," she whispered, pointing toward a small, humming structure. "You have 90 seconds from the moment you start. Once the lights go out, we move." Corbin nodded, his expression grim but resolute. He gave Silas a firm look. "See you on the other side." Then he vanished into the darkness. Maeve led Silas along the fence line, staying deep in the shadows cast by stacks of empty shipping containers. They reached the north wall, a sheer expanse of corrugated metal. A single steel door was set into it, with a small electronic panel glowing faintly beside it. There Maeve breathed, pointing to a thick armored cable running into the wall. "That's your conduit." Silas pulled a multi-tool from his pocket. His hands were steady. The fear was a cold knot in his stomach, but his focus was absolute. He carefully stripped a section of the cable's outer casing, exposing the intricate wiring within. He didn't have his own tools, but Maeve had provided a kit with instruments that felt surprisingly intuitive. He worked quickly, his mind mapping the flow of energy. He saw the lock not as a barrier, but as a puzzle. As his fingers danced across the wires, a sudden memory surfaced. Lyra, watching him with those wide, golden eyes as he fixed her beacon, her complete trust in him a tangible thing. He used that memory as an anchor. Just as he isolated the correct wire, the entire district plunged into blackness. The low hum of the power substation died, replaced by an unnerving silence. A moment later, shouts echoed from the south side of the warehouse. Corbin's diversion was working. "Now, Silas," Maeve urged. He made the final connection. A quiet click came from the door's magnetic lock. He pulled his hands back as Maeve slid the heavy door open just enough for them to slip through. They were inside. The warehouse was cavernous, a maze of towering shelves filled with crates and machinery. The only light came from the emergency power, casting long, distorted shadows. Maeve moved ahead, her stunner held at the ready. Silas followed, his heart pounding against his ribs. They heard footsteps approaching. Maeve flattened herself against a massive shelving unit, pulling Silas with her. 2 Kale guards in sleek, dark armor rounded the corner, their helmets scanning the area. They walked with an arrogant swagger, clearly believing the blackout was a simple malfunction. As they passed, Maeve moved. She was a blur of motion, silent and impossibly fast. She struck the first guard at the base of the neck and he crumpled without a sound. Before the second could even turn, she was on him, disarming him and applying the same precise strike. Both guards were down, unconscious. Silas stared, impressed by her lethal efficiency. She gave him a curt nod and gestured for him to follow. They moved deeper into the warehouse, navigating the labyrinth of forgotten cargo. The air grew colder and a faint, rhythmic pulse reached them. It was a low-frequency sound, something felt more than heard. Maeve stopped, listening intently. "The extraction equipment," she whispered, her voice laced with urgency. "They've already started." They crept to the end of an aisle and peered around the edge. In the center of the vast space, a large, circular machine glowed with a sickly green light. Several Kale technicians moved around a central platform. and on that platform, suspended in a cage of light, was Lyra. Her eyes were closed, her face etched with pain. Even from this distance, Silas could see her fighting. He could feel her spirit resisting the machine that was trying to tear her mind apart. The sight ignited a fire in his chest, burning away the last of his fear and leaving only cold, hard rage. They were not just taking information. They were destroying her, and he would not let that happen. Maeve did not hesitate. The technicians first. They control the machine. I'll engage the commander. Silas, when there's an opening, get to that console and shut it down. What about me? Corbin's voice crackled through their comms. Hold them off, Maeve ordered. Buy us as much time as you can. We move now. They broke from cover. Maeve was a phantom, closing the distance to the commander before he could fully register the threat. Silas veered right, aiming for the two technicians hunched over their glowing panels. He moved with the raw power of a man defending his world, tackling the first Kale and sending him sprawling into a stack of metal containers. The second technician spun around, raising a sidearm. Before he could fire, Silas grabbed a heavy conduit wrench left on a nearby cart and hurled it. The tool spun end over end, striking the Kale's hand with a sickening crack. The weapon clattered to the floor. Silas followed through, driving his shoulder into the man's chest and forcing him to the ground. Across the platform, Maeve and the commander were locked in a furious exchange. The Kale leader was larger than the others, his armor reinforced. He deflected Maeve's strikes with energized gauntlets that sparked on impact. "You cannot stop this," the commander's voice boomed, distorted by his helmet. "The data will be ours. Her mind is just the price." Silas scrambled toward the main console, his eyes fixed on the emergency release panel. A shimmering barrier of energy flared to life around it, blocking his path. The commander had activated a localized shield. "The shield is tied to his suit," Maeve grunted, narrowly dodging a powerful blow. "I can't get through it while he's focused on me." Silas looked at Lyra. Her head was bowed, her body trembling under the strain of the machine. The green light around her pulsed faster, and he knew they were running out of time. He pushed against the invisible shield, but it was like pushing against solid steel. Desperation clawed at him. "Lyra," he yelled, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Lyra, fight it." Inside the cage of light, her head lifted slowly. Her golden eyes found his. For a moment, the pain in them was so profound it stole his breath. Then something shifted. A flicker of the same fire he'd seen when she first healed herself. Her hands, previously clenched in agony, opened. A wave of brilliant, white energy erupted from her, silent and overwhelming. It wasn't an attack, but a pure release. The sickly green glow of the machine flickered violently. The lights throughout the warehouse dimmed and surged. The commander's gauntlets sparked and died, and the shield around the console vanished with a fizzle. The commander stumbled back, momentarily stunned by the energy backlash. It was the opening Maeve needed. She moved inside his guard, striking a series of precise points on his armor's joints, disabling the suit's servo motors. He froze, locked in place like a statue. Silas didn't wait. He lunged for the console, shoving a newly recovering technician out of his way. His fingers found the large, red panel labeled with an alien script he couldn't read but understood universally. He slammed his palm down on it. With a deep, groaning sound, the machine powered down. The cage of light dissolved into nothing. Lyra's body went limp, falling forward. Silas surged onto the platform, catching her before she hit the cold metal floor. He pulled her into his arms, her head resting against his chest. She was frighteningly light, but she was breathing. He held her close, shielding her from the scene. "I've got you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe." Maeve stood over the immobilized commander, her stunner aimed at his helmet. "Corbin, what's your status?" "I've got a bit of a party starting at the main entrance," Corbin's strained voice replied. "They found my little surprise. You need to get out of there." Lyra stirred in Silas's arms. She looked up at him, her eyes weary but clear. A faint smile touched her lips. "You came for me." "Always," Silas said, his grip tightening protectively. He felt the warmth of her hand as she weakly placed it on his cheek. The fight was over, but the battle for their escape had just begun. He met Maeve's gaze across the platform, a silent understanding passing between them. They had her back. Now they just had to get home. "Move," Maeve commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. "We're not going back the way we came in. We're leaving with an upgrade." She gestured with her stunner toward a sealed door at the far end of the platform. "That leads to their shuttle bay." Silas adjusted his grip on Lyra, lifting her securely into his arms. She felt solid, real, her warmth a stark contrast to the cold metal around them. He followed Maeve without hesitation, his focus narrowed to protecting the woman he had just pulled from the machine. "Corbin, new plan," Maeve said into her comms unit. "Get to the truck and meet us at the east perimeter. I'll send coordinates. Go now." "Copy that," Corbin's voice crackled back, followed by the sound of stressed tires. "Leaving the party behind." Maeve pressed a device taken from the commander's belt against a control panel. The heavy door hissed open, revealing a short corridor that opened into a cavernous hangar. A single, angular black ship rested in the center, its ramp down. Two Kale guards stood watch, turning in surprise as the team emerged. They raised their weapons, but Maeve was faster. Two silent pulses from her stunner sent them crumpling to the floor. Silas carried Lyra up the ramp and into the ship's sterile interior. The air inside was cold and recycled. He gently set her down in a pilot's chair as Maeve moved past them to the cockpit controls. The ramp began to retract with a heavy thud. "They're faster than I expected," Maeve noted, her hands flying across the unfamiliar console. "The warehouse is on full alert." Through the closing gap of the ramp, Silas saw a squad of Kale soldiers storming the hangar. He instinctively moved to block the entrance, positioning himself between them and Lyra. But the ramp sealed shut, plunging the cabin into the dim glow of instrument panels. A low vibration started as the ship's engines came to life. Lyra reached out, her fingers finding his hand. "Silas." Her voice was still weak but clear. He turned, his gaze meeting hers. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a deep, unwavering trust that made his chest ache. "I'm right here," he said, squeezing her hand. The ship lurched, then rose smoothly, a sensation of weightlessness followed by the gentle hum of its inertial dampeners. Maeve expertly navigated them out of the warehouse roof, which irised open just ahead of them. The night sky of Earth filled the main viewport. With a flicker, the view outside shimmered and vanished as the cloaking system engaged. They were invisible. They flew in silence for several minutes, landing in a secluded meadow miles from the city. The engines powered down, and the sudden quiet felt absolute. A moment later, the headlights of Silas's truck cut through the darkness as Corbin pulled up beside the alien craft. The escape was complete. Corbin climbed out, a wide grin of relief on his face. "Now that's what I call an exit. You guys sure know how to make an impression." Inside the ship, Maeve turned from the console. "The prisoner is secured in the ship's brig. My people are on their way to retrieve the vessel and the intelligence he carries. It's over." Lyra stood, leaning on Silas for support, and walked to the data beacon resting on a side panel. She picked it up, her movements now more steady. Using the Kale ship's powerful communication array, she interfaced the device. A holographic display of shimmering gold and blue characters projected into the air. Her fingers danced across the projection, inputting sequences with practiced speed. After a long moment, the display flashed a bright, reassuring green. Lyra let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for a lifetime. "The data is secure," she announced, her voice resonating with profound relief. "My home world has it. The Kale fleet will be intercepted. The war they wanted will not happen." The galactic threat was neutralized. A heavy silence filled the cabin as the weight of her words settled. Silas looked at Lyra, seeing not a refugee, but a savior. The unspoken question of their future hung between them. Maeve broke the silence, her tone softening. "Your mission is finished, Lyra. You can go home. You will be celebrated as a hero." Lyra turned from the console, her golden eyes finding Silas's. She walked toward him, her step certain. She stopped directly in front of him, her gaze searching his. "For a long time, my only mission was to get back to my world," she said softly. "But my world is not just a place. It is safety. It is kindness. It is a reason to keep fighting." She reached up and placed her hand on his cheek, just as she had in the warehouse. "My mission is complete, but I am already home." A powerful wave of emotion washed over Silas. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into an embrace that was both protective and tender. He felt her relax against him, a perfect fit. All the chaos, all the fear, had led to this single, perfect moment of clarity. Corbin stood in the open entryway of the ship, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. He watched his friend, a proud, knowing smile on his face. "Guess I should start clearing out that spare room for a more permanent guest," he said. Maeve offered a rare, genuine smile. "It seems my report will need an addendum." She held up a small, silver disc. "The Council will not be making formal contact with Earth for some time, but this will ensure our friends here are never truly out of reach." She handed it to Silas. It was warm to the touch. Weeks later, the familiar scent of oil and steel filled Silas's garage. He was working on the engine of an old pickup truck, the satisfying click of a ratchet echoing in the quiet afternoon. A hand offered him a clean rag, and he took it without looking up, his fingers brushing against hers. "Thank you," he said. "You missed a spot," Lyra replied, her voice filled with gentle amusement. He looked up then, wiping his hands. She stood beside him, dressed in simple earth clothes, looking completely at ease. The last of her injuries had faded, leaving no trace of the ordeal she had endured. Her golden eyes sparkled with light and life. The storm that brought her here was a distant memory, but the peace it had ultimately delivered was a daily reality. He looked from the engine to her face, a love deeper than any ocean settling in his heart. The crash in his garage had not been an ending, but the beginning of everything.